you so much, Scott. It is an honor to be back, to get to speak to you all again. I really, really enjoyed it last time, and I thank you all for having me back. Just a heads up, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the budget and some bills, and then my amazing colleague, Kate Murphy, from Texans Care for Children, is going to come up after me. So I don't know how you want to do questions, if you want to maybe sort of hold off until after she's done, just in case she covers something, because you may say, oh, you didn't bring up a huge giant issue, and then Kate may very well get into that. But my goal, again, is to talk a little bit about what happened at the budget on this past Thursday and then Friday morning, and then cover, again, a couple of bills. So, again, that's sort of the area that I'm going to cover. On last Thursday, the House passed a $218 billion two-year budget for fiscal year 2018 to 2019. This was the Senate budget that had come over from the House, so the Senate had already sent it out. So now that the House has essentially said, this is, we thank you for what you sent us, we're going to make our own changes, we see that there are quite a bit of differences between the two. The House utilizes something called the Economic Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund, which is essentially a giant checking account, which by the end of 2019 will be about $12 billion. And they really need to leave about $7.5 billion in there for transportation, but beyond that, it's dollars that they can use if they choose to do so. In the past, they've been sort of reluctant about tapping into it, but we are really seeing a budget shortfall this year. And so it's something that we're really encouraging them to do. And so one of my very first pieces of advocacy to you all is to tell people we need to use those dollars, because at the end of the day, what the programs those dollars are going to support are going to be about kids. It's going to be about education. It's going to be about healthcare. It's going to be about those things I know that matter to us all. That's where ultimately we're going to get some of those dollars. So just as a heads up, the House budget, while not great, because again, they could have used up to $4 billion of the rainy day fund. They used about $2 billion. So they left some money in there. But it is better than the Senate, who actually did not touch that at all. They decided to leave the rainy day fund completely untouched. And again, now they're sort of set for conference, which is essentially where both sides get together and say, okay, you come up with your plan, we come up with our plan. How do we combine these together? Specifically, as it relates to Child Protective Services, there were $3.5 billion of all funds were put into DFPS, into CPS function specifically, which is about $2 billion of general revenue. It means that the state put up about $2 billion, and then we have a match from the federal government to the tune of about $1.5 billion. This is an increase in $513 million in all funds and $433 in general revenue over the previous biennium. I will make all of these numbers available to you guys, so you don't have to sit there and frantically scramble a bunch of numbers. And I'm trying to go slow as possible, but I know sometimes I go fast. So the numbers may come furiously at you. I will share all of these numbers with you all. But just know that CPS did get an increase. It's one of the few areas that they really said, we do need to put more dollars into this, which is wonderful for CPS. They need that money. We think it's really positive that they're getting dollars there. But I do want to caution that sort of excitement about kids, because there are other areas, Medicaid, education, other areas that are going to be cut, and they're actually going to lose services. And I think one of the things we have to help frame the narrative around is putting dollars into CPS is great, but if we cut it in other areas, we're going to need more CPS. Not having the dollars for Medicaid and therapy and mental health services and criminal justice support services, substance abuse services, all of those things are going to create situations where you're going to have parents who enter crisis mode. And CPS cases very often come out of that crisis mode. When parents, if they just had the time or the resources, would be able to do the kind of parenting we all know that they're capable of, but they're just not always able to do that if things are stretched thin. Specifically, we had some funding for CPS caseworkers in the tune of about $292 million from all funds to maintain 828 full-time positions, as well as some salary increases. So the dollars were there in the base budget to ensure that the CPS workforce that we currently have will be there. And then we also looked at an increase of about $111 million to support an additional 644 caseworker positions, and 73 positions, and pardon me, that was in 2018, and then 733 total positions in 2019. So they're going to grow the department. They said you're going to get a whole lot, between 600 and 700 new caseworkers over the next biennium. It sounds great. We all know that one of the major issues at CPS is the caseload size. The salaries being increased is wonderful. They went from about $34 to $37 up to about $47,000 to $49,000 for starting salary at CPS. Almost $50,000 to start at CPS is a vast improvement and a really great valuation of the work that they do. The problem is that's about recruitment. And those dollars out there are going to bring people in the door. But if you don't have lower caseload sizes, and if you're not addressing the culture within CPS, you're simply going to lose people at higher salaries. So they had to sort of say, or my perspective, I'm very glad that they said, we need to really look at what it means once we have our caseworkers on there. And this is where those new positions are really going to help. They're hopefully going to lower caseload sizes, and they're going to really allow that. However, and this is where I think, again, we need to be smart advocacy and not just, we don't just want to grow. We want to grow in smart ways. And if they turn around and say hire 600 people next year, you're going to see huge turnover rates because it's really hard to bring that much of a workforce in and support them as they transition into child welfare. You support them as they deal with those heavy abuse and neglect cases. So really the goal is going to be advocate with DFPS and CPS and say, have a real smart strategy as you hire. Make sure that you're promoting supervisors who are able to really be there for our new workers. Make sure that you're really able to say, not to say, okay, big is better, but the how we get bigger is just as much an important part about it. We saw a funding increase of about $112 million in all funds and $25 million in general revenue funds to further support foster care payments. Currently, our foster care rates are at about 80% of what we know they should be. This increases will put it up at about 95%. So that's a really big increase. It would work for the legacy system as well as sort of the new foster care redesign system, which I'll mention briefly about that. But the idea would be it is over the whole state. These are really pass-through dollars, meaning that this 95% is really going to go directly to foster families, which is great. They need these dollars, but we also want to make sure that our child placing agencies have the capacity to continue to recruit and bring people in. So the fact that these dollars are going directly to families on one hand is excellent. On another hand, you do have to understand, or you have to sort of factor into the equation, that it does take a system and a well-funded system to actually keep our foster families supported and deliver training and information and all the things that they need. But at the end of the day, it's great that they said, you know what, we have to increase our dollars for foster care capacity. It was a challenge for some families to really support the kids with the amount of dollars they were getting. The relative caregiver program, which is great. We're seeing $57.3 million in all funds and $5 million in general revenue that would support relative caregiver. This is supposed to come from the Economic Stabilization Fund, which is the rainy day funds. They're supposed to bring some dollars in. Additionally, the House determined to zero out the enterprise fund, which is some dollars that the governor had set aside for businesses, and they decided to put that into HHSC and also DFPS. So some of the dollars, my guess, are going to be coming from there as well. So the way it currently works is that if you're a kinship placement, meaning that if you're a relative who's taking care of a child who's in the foster care system, you're going to get $1,000 for the first child, about $500 for each subsequent child, and then once you've had those kids for a year, you can apply for another $500 reimbursement. So hypothetically, if you had 2 kids for up to a year, you could get $2,500 to support those kids, which will get you through a month. You know, it's just not enough, and everyone's always admitted that. But traditionally, the system has been, well, this is your family, you should be taking care of them. More and more research shows that it's often grandparents, it's often others with those deep connections to children who want to make this work, but they're often working themselves. It can be hard to take time off of work. They need this financial support. So the idea is now going to be, if you're at 100% of the federal poverty level, you're going to get 75% of what the foster care reimbursement is. If you're between 200 and 300% of the federal poverty level, you're going to get 50% of what foster care rate is. And if you're at 200 to 300% of federal poverty, you're going to get 25%. Those who are over it are sort of, you know, the idea is we can only make the dollars go so far. This is fantastic. We're really excited that there's going to be new dollars in. It's a major increase, especially if you're at some of those lowest levels. We really hope that this is a great piece of support. Again, just to sort of tack that policy onto, because it has to be policy and budget, we have to make sure that we're ensuring that those kinship families also get the kind of supports that they need to deal with behavioral health issues, to deal with some of the other issues that it just takes from having a child who may have been in a situation with very little rules. All of a sudden now you have major rules, all the pieces that come with it. So again, at the end of the day, the dollars are great. We just want to make sure that we've got the support as well. And then finally, we're seeing about $139 in all funds and $108 million in general revenue for the daycare purchase services program. Daycare is so vastly important to this system. Be you kinship placement, be you a foster placement, many times you're working. And so you want to take care of these kids, but you have to have that out-of-home daycare. It could be after school care. For the younger kids, it could actually be all daycare. That costs dollars. We have to put money into it. In the past, back when I worked at CPS, we would often see the dollars run out. And so you would have all kinds of daycare for families as long as their kids came in between, say, January and September. But after that, it would be iffy on whether you can support it. We want to get that there the whole time. So again, overall, the tenor of things is CPS is getting funded. That is great. When you talk to legislators, you should praise them for the investment they've made in our child protective welfare, in our child welfare system. At the same time, you need to say, but we have those other areas around education, around Medicaid, around some basic, really needed services that we do want to make sure get dollars as well. I've got just a little bit of time, so I'm going to be short in this next piece because, again, I think Kate's really going to handle the policy stuff. But I'm just going to mention a couple, I think, key bills that may sort of jump up on SB 11. They're not companion bills, but they do something largely similar, which is they take a certain region of Texas and look to privatize the case management services. Basically saying the things that are currently done by CPS are now going to be done by the community. This is a controversial issue. Some people think it's really going to push us forward and bring innovation in and have those kids really connected to people who know how to take care of them. And others are worried about a job that has traditionally been done by the state, leaving the state. How will the oversight work and how will our performance measures work? There is major dives into that, and I can give people much more information if you're interested in sort of this particular issue. But just understand that of those two, in all likelihood, one or the other will probably pass, and will pass in some form that at least utilizes our communities more. We don't really know to what extent, and some of that is contingent upon the budget as well. Another really important bill is SB 203. So currently, Texas has something called permanency care assistance, which means that after you've adopted a child, you can access certain funds, which then help you continue to provide for that child. This would keep those payments in place. They're essentially being sunsetted as the process occur, and so we would allow that to stay. The other thing, a couple of things real briefly, HB 122 is not specifically about child welfare, but it's a really important bill. It's the raise the age bill. And so it would move the age from 17 to 18 of when children can enter the adult criminal justice system. There's a big fiscal note on it because I think there's a lot of kids there between 17 and 18 who utilize services in the juvenile justice system. There's a lot better services in the juvenile justice system. If you come in at 16, you have access to many supports, resources, interventions, programs that you're not going to have if you're at 17 and going into that adult system. So it comes with a cost, but it's incredibly important. And I mentioned it because we do have many kids in our foster care system because of lack of oversight, because of all sorts of a number of factors, are often involved in criminal justice. HB 3109 was actually heard today. This would require that an attorney ad litem stays on the case for the entire time of the case. And that's really wonderful because we have kids who sort of come into the state and then lose that legal representation, and it's a great way to continue that on. I'll mention two more real briefly. HB 634 is a bill that NASW supports, which is about CPS education requirements for caseworkers. Currently, you need to work for CPS, you have to have 60 hours of college credit, as well as 2 years of experience in child welfare. We'd really love for that to be a 4-year degree. Many reasons for that. Again, if you're interested, I've got some specific information about that. And then finally, HB 2335 is a great bill, and it's about trauma-informed care for caseworkers. This system is really moving towards a place where we understand just how much trauma these kids have experienced. 100% of the children in our child welfare system have experienced trauma because coming into CPS is a traumatic experience. It just is. That doesn't mean that they're all manifesting sort of major emotional signs to it. We know there's resiliency in children, and they all react in different ways, but we just have to understand that they've been picked up from one potentially funky system and dangerous system and put it in others, which hypothetically is safe, but that transition can still be very jarring on a child. And then many of them obviously come with the issues that come from abuse and neglect. So again, there's many more bills. There's, I think, somebody counted over 400 bills that actually really impact child welfare, 200 or so specifically involved on CPS reform. So there's a whole lot to cover. But in general, I think part of the feeling is legislators want to work on this issue. They want to invest their time and energy and effort into it. There's an excellent opportunity for you all to advocate on this, for you all to praise what's happened on the budget, and for you guys to continue to sort of push those policies and bills that you guys think are the best. So that being said, turn it over back to Scott so that he can introduce my colleague, and I'm happy to stay around for questions at the end.
Thank you, Will. And as he mentioned, we'll now introduce Kate Murphy, who is a Senior Child Welfare Policy Associate, leading the Texans Care for Children's work to keep children safe at home through effective child protective services workforce, prevention services, and other efforts, and working to ensure the child safety and success in foster care and beyond. Before joining Texans Care for Children, Kate was a mental health policy fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation here in Austin. In that role, she developed and advanced policy solutions at the state level to address a variety of mental health, public health, and criminal justice issues. Kate, we're glad that you are here with us today, and we'll look forward to to your presentation and a time of Q&A afterwards with Will. Let's welcome her. Thanks.
All right, so I'm covering all other, like 190? No, I'm just kidding. There are really 3 areas that I'm going to focus on, and these are 3 areas that have come up at the legislature kind of directly as a result of the executive branch and Dan Patrick calling the faith community to action. So that's something that I thought would be a meaningful place to start. And these areas are conscience rights protection, which is a religious liberty issue, kind of emergency foster care options, and congregate care. So these are kind of 3 areas that have been, well, there have been hearings on all of them, and we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with all of it. So starting with the conscience rights protection issue, there are 5 bills that have been filed on this subject, and they are designed to allow providers to sue the state if the state does something that interferes with their religious liberty. So a lot of the discussion around it has been surrounding abortion and surrounding the LGBTQ community and surrounding corporal punishment and other types of physical punishment. But these bills are HB 3859, which is the only one of the 5 that has had a hearing, HB 2779, SB 1536, SB 892, and HB 1805. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of any of them because they're all mostly the same. But basically what they do is they create kind of a sword for religious foster care providers. And what the concern is that religious foster care providers are going to be able to use these bills to do things that may hurt children, which is just a tragedy in my mind. It's being framed at the legislature as something that is going to be a protection for providers, something that's going to prevent them from getting sued. But if you read the bill language very closely, there is nothing in the bill language that is designed to protect providers from being sued. And in fact, it's really difficult to write any kind of legislation that's actually going to prevent them from being sued by kids in their care if they're doing something that's going to hurt them. So what these in fact do is allow providers who feel like the state is doing something to discriminate them, like to discriminate against them, to act out against the state. And so what that might look like, it might be the case that, you know, a child in their care they want to send to conversion camp, and they feel like something in their contract is going to prevent them from being able to do that. They could sue the state. If you look at sort of this privatization issue, one of the things that we're concerned about is that as we move toward a more contractor-heavy system, where we have more and more providers who are managing all of the care for services in the state, that they could sue the state if the state decided not to select them to manage all other providers in their region for some religious purpose. So right now the way it works is the state puts out a bid and everyone responds, and the way the law is written is that if you get denied a contract, if you get denied funding, if you get a contract not renewed, anything like that, it's very broad and sweeping for a religious reason, that you can then sue the state on those grounds. And so we've been working actually closely with Texas Impact to try to narrow the focus of those so they do what they're supposed to do and they aren't set up in a way that might lead to children being hurt. But right now, the way that they're written, the way that all of them are written, they're written in a way that could be used in a really damaging way to children. On the issue of emergency foster care options, I'm sure many of you have seen the news that we have kids sleeping in CPS offices, and there have been some pretty tragic events recently that have come out of that, kids running away from those offices and getting hurt. And so the state's really been working hard, and legislators have really been working hard to figure out what is the solution to this. Like, how do we prevent kids from sleeping in offices? How do we get them into a place where they can safely sleep? And so one of the bills that's related to this is HB 1620, and it is called, affectionately, or not so much, the Fostel Bill, which is a combination of foster care and hostels. And essentially what it does is it is designed to allow volunteers to come forward and not get paid and take in a kid for up to 2 weeks. That's how it's written right now. These volunteers don't get the same kind of background check that current foster families get or current emergency shelters get or any of those types of options. They don't get the same kind of training. It's very minimal. So they do like a quick criminal background check. They do make sure they've had a TB test, that their pets are vaccinated. And that's really, that's really about and that they have CPR training. And that's the extent of the training required to become one of these kind of emergency placements. And it's really, it's kind of an interesting idea, and it's a great way to try to get more people involved in the system. But one of the issues with it is that a lot of the kids, in fact, most of the kids who are sleeping in CPS offices are there because they're very difficult to place children, often because they have really serious behavioral issues or very serious medical needs. And so you need certain training and specific training to handle those kiddos, and to really keep yourself safe and to make sure that they stay safe while they're in your care. And so we're really watching that closely to try to make sure that the folks that get involved in that, if that bill passes, and it has had a hearing and it has been, I believe it's been voted out of committee now, to make sure that the people who are taking on that role or taking on that responsibility really have the training that they need to make sure that everyone involved is safe. And then the last one is this congregate care cottage home piece. And you'll have to forgive me if this gets a little bit wonky, but basically there are a number of providers that operate these facilities that are called cottage homes, and some of you may be familiar with them, and they provide very valuable services across the state of Texas. They have a really valuable place in our kind of continuum of care for children in foster care. But they are little cottages that all operate on one campus under a single administrator, and a lot of times, they're fenced off, they're kind of separate from the community. They may have a church on campus and a school on campus, and basically all of the recreation and life that a child has is going to be in that campus instead of in the community. So they're a really kind of restrictive setting, and what we found through research is that children tend to thrive in more family-like settings. And so what this bill would do is basically say that these cottage homes are the equivalent of a foster family home. So if you were to take in a child and adopt them and care for them in your home, they're saying that is the exact same as placing a child in one of these cottages on a campus who's going to be subject to these more restrictive rules. It's a more institutional kind of setting, and it tends to result in worse outcomes for kids. It tends to result in kids not getting adopted as frequently because they don't have the same kind of contact with the community and other people that they might get to know who might be interested in adopting them, or they might not, or they're obviously not going to be placed with one of our wonderful foster parents who are looking specifically to adopt kids who are in care. And so our concern with this is that putting them on the same playing field is not going to be what's in the best interest of kids. It's really what's in the best interest of those providers. And those providers have really, I believe, been responding to two things. One is that there's kind of a national trend away from this model of care, because we've seen that for most kids, most of the time, living with a family is better than living in an institution. And so that's been tied to federal funding. And in fact, the way that this bill is written, it could potentially cause Texas to lose or have some of its federal funding for foster care threatened, which would be really, really problematic. And secondly, several of you are probably familiar with the fact that the state of Texas has been sued in federal court. Happened several years ago, and the judge issued an order last year and issued an interim order at the beginning of this year that was very specific about the types of care that children, and particularly young children under the age of 13, could receive who are in our permanent managing conservatorship, so the kiddos who've been in foster care for longer than a year or a year and a half. And she really, the judge in that case really looked at this issue and said that Texas has been using too much congregate care or group care. It's really inappropriate. It's hurting kids. It's part of what's contributing to the unreasonable risk of harm that kids are facing that violates the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and that kids really need to be placed in these more family-like settings whenever it's appropriate, and that those families settings are either kinship homes that Will talked about a little bit, foster family homes, therapeutic foster homes, which are basically foster family homes with extra training to deal with special needs, and tribal foster care, and that's it. So kids who are in our permanent managing conservatorship system after that court order is finalized will not be able to use these homes at all. And so it's very much in conflict with what most people consider to be best practice and with what we really should be trying to do for our kids. And so those are kind of the 3 hot button topics that have all been presented to the legislature as a response to this call for the faith community to get more involved. And there are a lot of problems with a lot of the solutions that have been proposed on that front. And I'm happy to stand up here and answer questions with Will also.
And we'll invite Will back up. And I know foster care is an issue that we've talked about a lot this legislative session. It's an issue that your congregations, that your friends, that just about every group that we go out and speak to is talking about. And so we have 2 experts in the room today who I'm sure would love to answer any questions that you have. I'd love to hear if anybody in the room has questions. I'll check the devices to see if online folks do. Any questions for either of them? Or Jeff?
How's this cottage care different from a residential treatment center?
So it's slightly less restrictive than a residential treatment center. Some of the cottage homes have worked really hard to create a fairly normal environment on their campus. They vary. So some are more restrictive than others in terms of what they do. But the kids in RTCs or residential treatment centers tend to have more rules they have to follow. There are more strict requirements that the facilities have to follow. And these are in, like, if you look at the spectrum, it's typically kinship homes are least restrictive, foster family homes are next. Then there's this broad category of GROs, or general residential operations, which include cottage homes, emergency shelters, and transitional living centers. And they have some more strict rules about what they have to do. And then there's residential treatment centers, and they have the most rules and the most requirements.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
So, how much federal funding does the state receive for these services?
Which specific services?
When she was talking about we could lose federal funds, what is that percentage, or what does that look like?
So I don't know the specific breakdown of federal funding to state funding right off the top of my head, but a lot of our foster care system uses 4E funding for reimbursement. It's the majority, I think, of how we pay for foster care.
And the $40 are specifically tied to 40 requirements from the Fed. So if we were to do that and say we then put kids in cottage homes, we could lose dollars and say they're supposed to be in the least restricted placement if the national does not think that that's least restrictive. So yeah. It would be a big hit to the state.
Go ahead.
Can y'all speak to the pros and cons about privatization?
Yeah. Do you want to be pros or cons?
I can be pros. No, so I think one of the reasons it's become such a popular thing in the legislature is because the current example we have, the one that the community-based foster care contractor up in Fort Worth is doing a pretty good job. We've seen a lot of success there. We've seen a lot of increased capacity, and not just increased capacity, but the right types of capacity. So they've worked really hard to build out homes in rural communities, which the state has really struggled with. In their most rural community, they went from 3 homes to 20 homes. They have specific recruitment efforts for pregnant parenting foster youth and families that are willing to work with them, for LGBTQ youth, for large sibling groups. They developed therapeutic foster homes. They have 80 in their region now, I believe, to work with kids who have really high needs. They've really worked hard. Oh, and they have another initiative that's specifically aimed at helping creating a placement where the foster family is going to work really closely with the biological family so they can keep that connection. And so they've done a lot of really creative and innovative things using better data than the state currently uses, and having a little bit more flexibility. But I think the biggest controversy and the biggest concerns are over what it's not as much over what the continuing to expand that placement service function is going to look like, but what it's going to look like to transfer over case management services, because that's a whole different beast, and it's not something that they have done historically. It's something that the state has always done, and I think the area where it gets really tricky is in court, because right now the state is a party in the lawsuit, and so they're kind of transferring all of the responsibility and all of the interface time that the state has traditionally had with the child over. And so we don't know what that's going to look like, and we don't know what that's going to result in, and there might be all kinds of really complicated issues with how the state is going to pursue CPS cases when they don't have the same kind of eyes on the kids that they do now. And Will can expand on that because he's done it. The CPS caseworker job.
She did a fantastic job of describing why and how they do things well. She also didn't necessarily describe the case management that's happening by the CPS. She described all the things that foster homes are supposed to do, or child placing agencies are supposed to do. And so I guess, just as an example, one of the examples I use, so currently say you have a mom and she has a substance abuse issue and the kid comes into care for that. Say mom's doing really well, and say at about 9 months mom has a relapse. And say it's the kind of thing where she, say, smokes some marijuana or something. So along the lines of relapses, maybe she had issues with harder drugs, however it works, it's an issue, but it's the kind of issue that we should be able to address and say, well, what's going on here? Under the current system, if mom calls her caseworker, if mom reaches out, if something happens, and mom says, look, I need some help, the state has the ability to say, look, we want to have a 6-month extension, let's get to 18 months, let's help you get sober to the place where you need to be so we can get these kids back. Under the system of privatization, due to performance measures, are they supposed to reach their outcomes within 12 months? And do they say at 9 months, we get it, we know you want to work, but you know what, we're going to get a better dollar system back if we get this case solved in 12 months. And I'm not saying they would or wouldn't, I'm just saying these are the kinds of issues that arise from a system where all of a sudden performance measures and privatization, or where the contracts come in, versus sort of the accountability of the department to the state as well as to the public. And so these are the things I think we just really need to think about. Additionally, this means losing CPS caseworkers who have eyeballs and oversight. And we all know that there's issues there. I'm not pretending it's a perfect system, but you're going to be taking away that level of oversight. If we're just reading about cases, if we're trusting the contractor to do this, once again, it's concerning. And she mentioned the current contractor, they're amazing. I don't know if we can get the bar any higher than them. They've put $6 million of their own money to make this work. I mean, they truly are fantastic. My concern would be, do we have that in other areas of the state? I mean, they've got a 102-year connection to this community. I don't know where else you're going to find that. So, again, she did name some wonderful things, and this is not about knocking what's currently happened there. It's about saying, is all of Texas ready for this?
Right, and that's why it's so controversial, because we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know if it's going to be as successful. We had a previous attempt in the Wichita Falls area that failed. And so there are a lot of question marks on how successful this is going to be, whether it's going to be funded in a way that it's going to work, whether they're going to be able to really do the job. There's a reason it's been in the news so much. It's because there are just a lot of question marks. It is new. It is a new thing for Texas. There are differing reports on states that have tried something similar about how successful it is. So it's definitely something to watch, and there are definitely good things happening with what's going on in the current redesign region, and I think we want to make sure that we have the funding correct, and that the state has the right kind of oversight and involvement to make sure that it is going to continue to be fruitful if we're going to go down this path.